and carries all the sediment with it towards the sea. And in that process, all the sediment is actually flowing towards the shores. So here, if you see in Pondi, so we are here, and we are just north of a very large river, the Kaveri River, and over millions of years, the Kaveri has been bringing all the sand from the Western Ghats, the hills. The rain has been falling. It's been raining on the hills. That rain is flowing along the Kaveri River. It's carrying water and it's carrying sand, and all that sand has been reaching the shoreline here, the shoreline south of Pondi, in the Karaikal, Nagapattinam, Kadalo region, and we have what is called a delta forming. It's like this large nose that's protruding from the east coast. And if we did not have the Kaveri, probably the Indian coastline would have been, looking something more like this, just like a linear coastline. But because this river has brought all this sand, we have this protrusion coming out. So we are sitting right at the north of a large volume of sediment, and this is in fact what characterizes our coastline. Our coastline, if you drive all along our coastline from here to Chennai, what do you see? You'll see sand dunes, you'll see plenty of sand, sand dunes, estuaries, backwaters. These are all, typical characteristics and features of a sandy coastline. So this is how our shoreline looks. Next slide. This sand, once it has reached the shore, once the sand has reached the shore, it just doesn't sit there, it gets churned by the waves, and this is an illustration of how the waves and the ocean currents and the wind, they all have an effect on the sand, and the sand gets picked up and it's continuously moving, so it's like a washing machine, and the sand is always in motion, So it's a very dynamic environment, and particularly in India, because we have the monsoons, we have the southwest monsoon, we have the northeast monsoon. These monsoons actually also, again to come back to Wizard's explanation, the rain starts from the sun, So it's all that solar energy that is being transferred to the winds and that is being transferred to the rains. All that energy is impacting our environment, our coastline. And all that energy, in fact, is displaying itself, along our shores, and it's a very dynamic environment. A lot of things keep happening, So a lot of sand keeps moving. So they are the drivers, These are the drivers. The sun, the wind, the waves are the drivers of this movement of sand. Next slide. And the sand. So the sand can move. Or typically, of course, the sand moves in many ways. But we can, kind of identify two sorts of movements of sand along the shore. One is what is called as a cross-shore movement. That is to say, the sand moves from the shore away, and then again also, of course, away from the sea back to the shore. And this you will see, for example, you would have all observed. Maybe the kids here would not have observed because they haven't seen these things yet. But you would have seen times of the year when the beaches grow and when the beaches shrink, So it's not that the sand disappears and then reappears. It's that the sand is being, transported, carried, from the shore to a place offshore, and then from a place offshore back onto the shore. And that typically happens, So you have rough seas, large waves. The waves will take the sand away. And then when you have calm seas, the small waves will push the sand back on the shore. So you have this cyclical, seasonal feature of beaches growing and shrinking, but the sand is there. It's just moving around. Next slide. Then you have another type of movement of sand, which is along the shore. So let's say this is the shore, this is the sea. These are the waves, the incoming waves, and then they break somewhere close to the shore. And the energy of the waves breaking on the shore, as we saw in the photo above, picks up the sand, and then the sand then moves along the shore. So this is called a longshore movement.
What happens when there's one of those rock?
Precisely. Yeah. We'll come to that. Yeah. So in Pondi, we have a predominantly longshore movement. Because if you see, if you look at the satellite imagery here, you will look and you will see because of the orientation of India's coastline and the direction in which the winds come. I don't know if it's clear enough, but you can see the swell lines here. You can see the wave lines. So you have the waves hitting the shore at an angle, and because of that angle, then you have a push towards one direction. And in Pondi, we have two seasons. We have the southwest monsoon and the northeast monsoon. The southwest monsoon is just finishing, and we are getting into the northeast monsoon. And during the southwest monsoon, the waves are coming from the south. So the waves are going in this direction, and the sand is moving in north. And then in the northeast monsoon, the waves come from the northeast, and the swell will be in this direction, and the sand will be pushed south. Next slide. And this is one of the features you will see when there's a longshore movement. You will see these features of let's say if you were to follow a grain of sand, while it's moving along the shore, you will see that it follows the zigzag path. It gets pushed by a wave, it gets pulled back by the wave, then it gets pushed by a wave, gets pulled back by the wave, and so this is the swash and the backwash. And you will see these features on a beach. You will see these arc features along the beach, which show that actually it's a kind of a longshore movement. Slides. Yeah, go ahead. In fact, I like this to be an interactive session, not only me speaking all the time. So if you have questions, please ask. Please shoot.
Just that the shore is that fabric.
Oh, so in this case, maybe misleading. Shore, sea. This is just a diagram. Okay, the shore, the sand, and the sea, and the same thing is replicated here. Shore and the sea. So these are two separate images. This is just an illustration, and this is a photo.
This way, it's moving.
It's moving in this. Yeah, let's say it's moving along. Let's say the net movement.
Which horizontal?
Yeah, along the shore. Yeah, exactly. So it's moving in this. The net movement. Let's say if you were to follow a grain of sand, you will see that with time it's somehow reached. Yeah. So here it's also. Sorry?
This is also our movement.
This is our movement, exactly.
In the water, that's exactly how you go.
Exactly. Also, when you're playing around if you're swimming in the beach, and then you also get dragged.
Yes.
You also drift. Yeah.
Along the shore.
Exactly. Next slide.
I have a question.
Yeah, please do.
Can explain again why does the sand recede and come forward?
What I told you earlier, when the beaches grow and when the beaches expand. So see what happens is, in fact, I think even this slide can also serve as that demonstration. So I'll just come to your answer. I will just explain a little bit of this. So I get thirsty when I talk, so then I'll keep drinking water once in a while. So the thing is, when the sand is spread on a beach, it forms some natural features which we would have all seen. We would have all been to a beach, and we would have seen. On the landward side, you have a dune. It may be a small dune or it may be a large dune. And then you have let's say the beach at different levels. Sometimes a higher beach and then a lower beach. And then if you go into the sea and you go a little further away into the sea, you will have a sandbar. Okay, you can swim further away, and there's a place about 20-30 meters from the shore where you can stand, and the waves are breaking there. Now this used to be the case here, but since the coastline has eroded, the sandbars have gone. The sandbar. So what you can observe a little bit is that there is it's a bit like a mirror image. You have a dune here on land, and you have an underwater dune in the sea. So it's a bit like a mirror image. You have these features, and these features are just they've just evolved over millions of years, and this actually works best along a sandy shoreline. Okay, so there's almost I don't want to sound like a creationist, but there's almost like a design intelligence in this system, and I'll explain how. So what the sandbar does is, when the waves break on the sandbar, all the energy is dissipated here. Okay, all the energy is dissipated here, and you have only small waves reaching the shoreline. So the shoreline is stable, because that's another thing of all natural systems. Whether it's a forest, whether it's a river, whether it's a beach, nature for some reason or the other, and I think there must be some wisdom in it. it likes equilibrium. It likes stability. It likes equilibrium, and it knows how to balance equilibrium with dynamism. And it reaches that state of equilibrium. So if you look at a mature rainforest, you will have plants growing, dying, and all that happening. But the rainforest stays the same. It doesn't. It's in a state of balance. Same thing happens along the coastline. So you have a state of balance which has evolved over millions of years. So that state of equilibrium has resulted in this formation of dunes and sandbars. Okay. So now what happens when you have a cyclone, a storm, you have large waves. Okay. Now the big waves, large waves will just roll over the sandbar. Okay, and they will start hitting the shore, and they will start removing sand because the large waves have a lot of energy. Now all that sand slowly gets transported away further offshore, and then they start building a larger sandbar. So it's as though the system starts protecting itself from larger waves, and the dunes are nothing else but a storage, a reserve of sand for such occasions. So when you have a cyclone, it's the dune that will erode, and it will actually supply sand to the sandbar. And you will see as the cyclone progresses. Let's say we have a cyclone, and you see the depression coming 3, 4, 5 days. At the third, fourth day, you will see the waves breaking really far. And that's because all the sand actually has moved. So it's as though the shoreline is almost kind of protecting itself. And then during the calm season, the sand will be pushed back by the waves, and the dune will be re-nourished with sand. So these can be cycles that happen during the year, or they can be cycles that happen over 10, 20, 50, larger cycles. So this is, does it answer your question? Yeah, all right. Cool. Next time. So this is how the Pondi coastline used to be, before it got messed up. This is south of Pondi. So you had, sandbars, a nice beach on 2 levels. Then you had the sand dunes. And also what happens, again, quite intelligently, the sand dunes will be covered with vegetation. So the vegetation will stabilize the dunes. So the whole system is nice and stable and happy. This is in fact just when they started building the harbor, and you can see the first construction going on. And you have and typically behind the dunes you will have estuaries, and this you will see as you drive along the east coast to Chennai. You will see the sand dunes, towards the seaward side of the road, and then you will see a lot of backwaters and estuaries at the back. Next slide. So here you have Pondi again, sandbar, the town, a small beach. The reason why Pondi had a small beach, the town always had a kind of a narrowish beach, is because the French built their houses on the dunes. Okay, because that was the highest spot, the safest spot. So they built the houses on the dunes, and by doing so, they have actually removed the sand from the equation of the beach system. So let's say we can. What is this is technically called a sand budget. Every coastline has a sand budget. It needs a certain amount of sand to sustain itself. And so when we start covering the dunes, or we remove the sand from the dunes because we build over them, then that sand is removed from the budget, and the budget becomes poor. It loses sand. So this is one of the reasons why Pondi always, ever since the French came, let's say, and they built over the dunes were small. Next slide. So as we discussed, the most dominant phenomenon here is this longshore drift, also abbreviated as LSD, not to be confused with other things. Next slide. And the amounts of sand that are actually moving are quite large. It's about 500,000 cubic meters of sand, moving northwards, and it's about 1 lakh cubic meters of sand moving northwards. So there's a disparity. Okay, there's more sand moving northwards, less sand moving southwards. Forget the numbers. You don't need to. All you need to understand is that there's a large amount of sand. I think I'm a little rusty, but I think I had once done the calculation that if a truck can carry 10 cubic meters of sand, you divide that by 10. So it's about 500,000. So you have 60,000 trucks, being carried along the shoreline. You divide that by 360, and so on and so forth. And you will see that it's like, I think a truck every few, half an hour, I think there's a truck of sand moving, And all this is happening without even you knowing anything, without even you moving a little finger. and it's just happening on its own. Well, very much like rivers transport so much water, without turning on a switch, Similarly, beaches are also compared to, rivers of sand. Yeah, they call it as rivers of sand, and that works on its own. And when we disturb and we try to fix it, then we realize the amount of energy we need to put in to replicate the same process.
So, quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of the geography of the country,
Yes.
if it's going north, where does it really?
Yeah, good question. So there are sinks. There are sinks. So the sand keeps moving. So what happens is, again, these are all equilibriums that have been formed over millions of years. Why it is 500,000 is because this alignment with this amount of sand coming every year, this amount of energy from the monsoons, this whole configuration has resulted in nothing much changing when 500,000 cubic meters of sand keeps moving. Okay. So now you will have sinks. You will have sinks, for example, you will have some offshore canyon. You can have some depressions where the sand will go and then deposit itself there. So that can happen. Or for example, you have, the Ganges Delta, where a lot of sand actually comes also from the sea and the delta keeps growing. So then you have these formations that let's say our world is still evolving, in the sense that you may have new features, new mountains, and everything still being formed as we live here.
With the Ganga Delta, for instance,
Yes.
with the visible aspect of it that we see is the mangroves there.
Right, exactly, yes.
So for this movement, if it's going northward,
Yes.
with the country becoming like that,
Yes.
where does it go and what is the?
So, okay, there are, this is just the broad picture. Like, for example, in Andhra Pradesh, we have some sinks. So the sand in Pondi doesn't go all the way to the Ganges.
Yeah,
But then, so you'll go to Andhra Pradesh, and I think there are even some deltas there, the Godavari Delta, the Krishna Godavari, you have a few deltas. So all this goes, and honestly, I haven't done the research, but I mean, it is known that these sandy, deposits will go and end either in a delta or on a headland or somewhere in a canyon. So this is where it ends.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't affect the state as such, wherever it is. Like, is it?
It
Because
may.
it's a massive amount.
It may, yes,
It's
exactly, yes.
agriculture.
Yeah. So you have, in fact, so you don't have only erosion along the coastline, you also have accretion. So that's also what keeps happening. In fact, there was a study conducted by a very famous Dutch institute, I don't know, that they have found actually that the last few decades, the coastlines have grown. They have not reduced. So it was actually quite counterintuitive because we would have thought that the shorelines would shrink, but in fact they have grown. Next slide. I think so. Anyway, we've all understood that there's a lot of sand moving north, and next slide. Sorry. Next slide. Yeah. Now let's have a look. How the coastline used to be before we started messing around with nature. Next slide. I don't know if it's clear enough. Looks a little pale from here, but this is the Pondicherry coastline. This is the old pier. This is Le Café. Again, Le Café, old pier. And this is actually, I don't know how many of you know Kuruchikupam, just north of the old distillery. So you have these beautiful coconut groves with these lovely beaches. Next slide. Again, views of Pondi. Next slide. And this is our fantastic, fabulous Rabo Beach. Some of you would remember it fondly, and it's of course all gone. Big pity. Anyway, next slide. So this is how it used to be, and then after we started interfering with nature, and probably some of you already know that the reason why our beaches have eroded here in Pondi and Auroville is primarily because of the harbor that was built. So this was your question. Your question was, what happens when we build a structure across the path of this movement of sand? So the sand is moving. We said from the south, the sand is moving north, and then suddenly we build a wall, which wasn't there before. We build a wall. Now all this sand starts accumulating here because our dear little grains of sand don't have small feet, and they cannot walk over this wall and go on the other side. So they all get stuck here, till this whole thing fills up, and then starts spilling over here, So there are two things that can happen. Either, let's say, the sand fills this whole compartment, which will take decades, will take 40, 50 years, we don't know, for all that huge compartment to fill up. Or let's say, we remove this breakwater, or this breakwater is it breaks down, and then the sand slowly can start going around this feature. So essentially, what we have told the beach is that we don't want you to be aligned like this anymore. We want you to be aligned like this. We have realigned the coastline, and that changes the whole equation. So on this side, you have sand accumulating, but now all the sand on the other side of this harbor, and this is why the erosion happens, all the old sand, the sand that used to be on those beaches, and in fact, this red line is showing where the beach used to be before the harbor was built. All the old sand is removed by the wind and the waves and the ocean currents, but the new sand is not able to reach that shoreline. So you have erosion on that side, and you have accretion on this side. Next slide. This is an aerial view of the harbor. You can see all the sand depositing here. You can see how much the beaches have grown here. So till the beaches, grow till here, and then we have bypassing, natural bypassing. We will keep facing erosion on this side. You have a question?
Yeah, for the erosion, if there is depleted sand, is there nothing in terms of reforestation that might happen?
Yeah, this is what we'll come to. This is what we've been trying to do all these years.
Also, because the movement of sand towards north is more,
Yes.
won't it make a difference in the erosion? Won't it be?
Yeah. So it's, let's say, because the erosion is on one side. See, if the sand movement was equal on both sides, then we would not have this problem. Okay, because if you have 1 lakh cubic meters being removed and 1 lakh cubic meters coming back, then you don't have much difference. The problem is that we have 5 lakhs being removed and only 1 lakh coming back. So then that's this, let's say, one-sided movement, which then causes a problem when we do this kind of intervention along the coast.
Sorry, can you repeat that? 5 lakhs being.
So if we have, let's say, 5 lakhs going north, which is the situation now, we have 5 lakh cubic meters of sand moving north, but we have only 1 lakh coming back.
It got stopped along.
Yeah, so this got stopped here, but the sand that was here has nothing else stopping it to the north. So there is south.
The current is also not that much to be pushing it that far.
No, the current here or here is the same. Because it's the same ocean.
Yeah.
The same ocean doesn't change. Yeah, you would have a small pocket here. Maybe which is sheltered. But beyond this pocket, it's the same. The same. You have the same ocean, the same sea. In fact, you'll find a small beach here. You're not fully mistaken. You'll have a small beach here because that's a small little pocket. The rest is gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Isabel.
Can you say something about the effort that one of the governors made of having a sand bypassing system?
Yes,
of
yes.
which the remnants are still there.
Sure. No, this is very important. In fact, I need to mention that, interestingly, this harbor, when they built this harbor, it's not that they did not know that this will happen. They knew very well that, in fact, this phenomenon will take place and that the beaches in front of Pondi will disappear. And because they knew that Pondi is an important town, they said this cannot happen. So they, in fact, designed a unique harbor. And in fact, it's the only harbor in the whole of India which is designed like that. And it's copied from a harbor in Florida, I was told. And what it does is, there is in fact a tunnel. There is a tunnel that goes under the water from this side, from the south to the north. Okay, so you can actually, like you have a tunnel between France and the UK, and you go through the channel, and you can walk from one side of the channel to the other. Similarly, here you have a tunnel that goes underwater. You can walk from Virapattinam to Mampakirapalayam underwater with about 10 meters of water over you. Now, the reason why that tunnel was built was because the engineers who designed this, they said that we cannot let this happen. So we have to pick up with a machine that picks up sand like this is called a dredger. So we have to pick up the sand with a dredger, and then we have to pump it on the other side. Okay. So you can see in this photo, you can see this little dot here. Not very clear, maybe. But anyway, you can see a little dot, and you can see a little line behind the dot.
Yeah.
So this is a dredger, and in fact, it's digging up the sand here, and it's pumping it. You can see. So that's nice. She's swollen. Then so there's a pipe here that goes in the tunnel and then deposits the sand on the other side. So this was supposed to happen. This is a very rare pick because this dredging happened very rarely. So it's a capture of a very rare phenomenon. And now the problem why this doesn't happen is because it costs a lot of money. So this is what I was telling you. Imagine if we had to do this with trucks, the amount of energy we would have to spend, money and the resources we would have to mobilize. Nature was doing that. Now we said, okay, we will be the masters of nature. We will move the sand that nature wants to build, but then we don't factor the costs properly, and then it's not being done. So as a consequence, the sand needs to be pumped constantly. You can either do it with a truck. You can have trucks, picking up the sand, driving all around. But of course, it's more energy efficient and less of an effort. If you have a big sand pump here, a dredger, which sucks in all the sand like a vacuum cleaner, and then it pumps it on the other side and deposits it there. So this is what we call the sand bypassing that Elizabeth was referring to. Unfortunately, this did not happen. But let's not cry on spilt milk. On the positive side, we have a harbor that is ready to work. It's already inbuilt. It's already designed. It's already an intelligent harbor. So it's only a matter of turning the switch on and getting this thing to work. So there is already something in place.
If we make this a harbor,
Yes.
With the legs,
Yes, exactly.
then between
Then-
the legs, the sand.
Absolutely. So the French in the when the French were here, in fact, they also wanted to build a harbor like this because they wanted to bring their ships in. But then they had at that time, talking of the 1800s, they had done I saw documents. They had done a feasibility study at that time, and they had calculated that it's too expensive to maintain. They can't afford it. So they chose to actually do that in Karaikal, where it's simpler to do. And what they built in Pondi was a jetty. A pier on pillars. It's and this is what you have at the old pier opposite the Gandhi statue. So then, on stilts, on poles, and in fact, it's smart because then the sand can move and you're not disturbing anything. Or if you're disturbing anything, it's very small. And then of course, then the other pier was built. The reason why the harbor was built was actually it's most of these things happen upside down, topsy-turvy, and unfortunately, more often than not, it's just to blow money. In the sense that maybe I'll just elaborate for 30 seconds because it's important. You have a question?
Why was it clear though?
Which one? The old pier, the one at the Gandhi statue?
No, the barrel.
This one, this one. In 1986, 1989. Yeah. The French came much before. No, this one. I'm talking of the old pier. This was built in 1986. But the old pier at the Gandhi statue, that was built in the 1800s because they abandoned. So they wanted to build something similar, but they did the calculation. They saw it's too expensive to maintain, too much sand to mess around with, too much pumping, digging. It's not worth the effort. There's not that much trade. So give it up, So now the thing is, in the 80s, I don't know if you remember, I mean, not the young ones, of course, but there was a big push for infrastructure in the 80s, and a lot of airports got built, a lot of ports got built, a lot of underground storage system. In fact, few things that happened in Pondi, the underground storage system, the airport, and the port were all built at the same time. So the central government had decided that every state needs this infrastructure. So a budget is allocated. They say every state will get this much money to do this work. Build an airport, build a port, build underground storage system. Now, whether you need a port or not, if you don't spend the money, you have to give it back to the government, the central government. Okay. So why give back the money if you can spend it and put some money aside? Okay. So a lot of the projects actually get built like that. Think of smart city or think of anything. It's we get a lot of money. If we don't spend it, we have to give it back. So let's spend it and keep some for ourselves. And this port was built. So these are what they call white elephants because they serve little purpose. They're just on paper and they just look good on paper, but then in reality they don't do much. And so this harbor was built quite uselessly. In fact, what was needed was a fishing harbor. because at that time, the new types of fishing boats started coming with, engines, that what they call the motorized fishing vessels. They were larger, they could not land on the beach. They needed a harbor. So the question is, did they need such a large harbor? No. The reality is that they did not need such a large harbor. If a small harbor had been built, it would be much easier to manage, and it would do much less damage also. So next slide. Okay, I'll just go back here. So this is, let's say, the mother of all the problems. But then, as though it was not enough, we started adding to it, in the sense, when I say we, we human beings. And so what happened is the beaches started eroding, so we started building seawalls. And then, when Pondi had built all its seawalls up till the border of Tamil Nadu, then it stopped because it said, not my problem, it's, Tamil Nadu's problem now. And so they just passed the buck on. Now, the reason why, one of the reasons why seawalls don't serve the purpose is because they don't bring sand. What the coastline needs is sand, and we're not helping by putting rocks. In fact, the rocks add to the problem because they do several things. I don't know if this is a slide that shows behind, later, or maybe I'll keep it for a few slides later. If it doesn't come, I'll bring it up there. Next slide. Yeah, so you can see the seawalls that were being built in Pondi, starting from the 90s till the early 2000. So they built the seawalls, just dumping rocks. Then the tsunami came, and that didn't help, because they got even more money to build seawalls, And a seawall is a beautiful project because especially for a government, and especially for a corrupt government, because you get to spend a lot of money in a very short time with very little technology and engineering. So let's say if you go to build a hospital for the same amount of money, you would have to design a hospital, you would have to have a school, you would have to get approvals, you would have to do all the design, how many beds, how plumbing, electrical, this, that, all the whole works. It would take you 10 years to execute. The same amount is blown in 3 months. All you need is a quarry. You need a few trucks, some dynamite, and then you move the whole thing and you dump it. And how much of it gets dumped in the sea, nobody knows. So then it's a wonderful money spinning thing. So the more seawalls you build, the better it is for some people, And of course the tsunami came, and then there's loads of money, available for anyone who had an idea of how to spend it. So the seawall that was 5 meters wide became 30 meters wide, so on and so forth. And of course, only adding to the problem. Next slide.
China took 10 days to build a hospital.
China took 10 days.
During COVID.
Yes. But I'm not sure the scorecard is too good when it comes to coastal management, I think.
The sea walls.
Yes.
What is the logic?
So the logic is, there is a certain logic. There's a certain logic. The logic is, let's say, if you have people living behind, let's say you have people living close to shore, those people are going to lose their homes. You do want this. There is an argument that you do want to protect their homes. Now but the problem is, if you have an exceptional event like a cyclone, mega cyclone that has come and taken away your beach, and then you need to do an immediate protection after because more homes will get lost. Then it's something that's actually unexpected. You don't anticipate it. But in this case, it is 100% anticipated. And not only, that if you build a seawall here, next year it will erode, and you have a guaranteed contract for the next seawall. So there's a built-in. It's a very sustainable project in a way. Self-sustaining project. So, and the more you erode, the bigger the contract. So it is very attractive. Next slide. So this is what happens. Maybe we go back to the previous slide. So what happens is with a seawall, one of the problems with the seawall is if you look at a natural sandy shoreline, you will see that the beach is very gently sloped, right? And it's porous. It's like a sponge. So when a wave breaks over the beach, two things happen. One is the energy gets dissipated. The wave spreads itself thin over the sand. and then being porous like a sponge, the water just goes into the sand, and there's very little actually water that flows back. You don't have that backwash, the big backwash. When you have a seawall, you have the whole energy of the wave hitting the seawall and then rebounding. And that rebounds, that bounce back. In fact, you can see that if you swim close to a seawall, that rebound will carry all the sand away from the shore. So that's how it causes erosion. It exacerbates the erosion. Next slide, so we can skip this.
So next to the seawall, it keeps getting deeper.
Yes, exactly. And therefore, you have to keep dumping more rocks because the rocks fall in the water. So now, of course, one of the major problems with the seawalls was that it was blocking the access to the sea for all the fishermen who were using the coastline. Because the traditional fishermen here, as you would have seen, their boat and their harbor is the beach. So that's where they park their boats. That's where they land their catch. That's where they dry the fish, process, they do all their work there. So seawalls were messing up with that, and then they started building, what are called groins. These little protrusions. I think we can go to the next one. And this is the large one at Serenity Beach, Bodhi Beach, whatever you call it, under Kupam village, that was being built. Now the groin is actually nothing else but a copy of the harbor in a way. The design of in the harbor, the intention was not to trap sand, but in the groin there's a design to trap the sand. So you build another barrier, another, let's say, extension to catch as much sand as possible. But the only problem is that actually you are repeating the same problem. You're not solving the problem. You're not addressing the root cause, and you're just going on adding. And I know you're going to accelerate the erosion to the north, because you're just making it more and more difficult for the sand to get to the north.
And you want the sand so that you can park the
Both the fishermen want the sand. Yeah. So the fishermen want this access open so that they can park their boats. So they get the village gets its little pocket of sand, but then it's a bit selfish because then they don't think of what happens to the next 5 villages. Because their beaches will go because of the groin. So you can see as the groin is being built, the beaches have started receding. Next slide. So is there a question somewhere?
Are you saying that there are people who also park their boats on top of the water, right?
Oh yeah, right. Those are people who have lost the beach and who have no option.
Yeah, and this cannot be practice already.
So but the problem with parking a boat on the water is that the wear and tear on the boat is much higher in the sense, because the boat is rocking and shaking all the time in 24 hours, so then the boat will become older and damaged much faster. So that's why people like harbors or they like beaches when they can pull their boat up, then the boat is not getting damaged. So this is, you can see what the groin did the same thing as the harbor, trapped some sand, but then on the other side it started eroding. And of course to the north we had quiet. And then next slide. So then we started kind of documenting to see what happens. And then so this was in April 2007, just when the groin was built. Next slide. And then this was just 2 weeks later. You can see the erosion, and it's all very fast. It's all very fast because there's a lot of sand. Next slide. And then this is April again. Next slide. 6 weeks later. Next slide. Once more.
Is that not just high tide?
No, unfortunately not. 10 weeks later. So this is because you can see the structure of the beach changing. It's getting steeper. The sand is being removed, and then so this many weeks later. This was about 3 months later, and then quiet. The next slide. So you can see the progression. Next one. So this is how Quiet lost its beach. So it lost about 70 meters of beach in a matter of a few months. This was just in front of Quiet, and that put Quiet in a very difficult spot. Of course, we had a lot of meetings, sessions, trying to fix the problems. But there's always this difficult situation where you're trying to protect your property, but at the same time you don't want to harm the neighboring properties. And what do you do? How do you deal with it? And at one point of time, you become helpless. You say, "Listen, I can't think of the larger picture. As long as I can save myself, I'm fine." So that's a tricky debate. That tricky debate. How do you resolve it? I'm not sure. And I have some suggestions which I will maybe suggest later. Go ahead.
Is the dredging of the sand at the port more expensive than all of this work altogether?
It's not.
So
Exactly.
it's cheaper to
Absolutely,
add
absolutely.
dredge that
Absolutely.
and take off all.
So just to give you an idea, a groin project like the one that was built was about 40 crores.
Not from the contractor point of view.
Not from a contractor point of view, yes. So the groin is about 40 crores, and the dredging is just this is one contract. The dredging is 15 crores per year, okay. And if you do it, you save the trouble for everyone, you know. But if you do this, you'll have 40 and 40 and 40 and 40 and so on and so forth.
And the whole scent bypassing system would have worked.
It would have worked, yeah. So in fact, now the groins do another they do another problem. They do another thing. Is in fact you can see this satellite imagery. What they do is they divert the sand offshore, you know, because again they realigns the shoreline, and the sand is all moving offshore. So we start losing sand from the beach, you know. So then it kind of introduces a new element. Next slide. We also did a bit of an analysis, a very rough. I mean, this is something anyone can do. Anyone who knows how to fiddle around with Google Earth. We tried to see, you know, how much beach was gained and how much beach was lost. You know, so you do have, you know, because of the groins, you do have some beaches gained, but because of the groins, you have some beaches lost. And we saw that overall, you know, you lost. We gained, you know, 1 square meter of beach on one side, but we lost 4 square meters on the other side. So that means you almost lose 3 times as much, 3 to 4 times as much. So does it make sense? We don't think so, you know. And but then what else? That's the larger question. Next slide. You can see here this is in Kotakupam. And we had also found that the erosion actually is advancing at about 1 meter per day, you know, northwards. So it's something that is actually still ongoing. It's still ongoing. It's not as we speak. There's a meter of beach going very close somewhere. Next slide. And now the problem. So one of the reasons why we were objecting to hard structures is that, you know, because it interferes with the process, it increases erosion, it transfers the problem to your neighbor. You know, it doesn't address the root cause. It has to go on forever because the rocks will keep sinking. Then the ecosystem changes, for example, from a sandy ecosystem to a rock ecosystem, you know. And there isn't very definite scientific data on this, but there has been a suspicion, not here in Kerala, where they have built large amounts of seawalls, that the numbers of jellyfish have actually increased. And that's because jellyfish, when they are small, when they're babies, they need to attach themselves to a hard rock. They're almost like corals, you know, they go and attach themselves to a large rock. So the more rock we give, the more they can survive. So in Kerala, they have in fact found that, you know, there have been a lot of jellyfish blooms. So, you know, we're starting to interfere with the ecosystem, you know. Then, of course, you know, traditional fishermen have lost access to the sea, money. And then the best form of protection is the sand, you know, the sand dunes and the sandbars. You know, the seawall will not protect us more than a certain amount. So there's also that problem. And then where do you get the rocks from? You know, the rocks, you just don't manufacture rocks. You have to break some mountains, you have to blast some mountains, which actually have forests on them maybe, which actually feed rivers. So then you're actually spoiling an ecosystem to fix another ecosystem, so to say. I mean, so you're actually amplifying the damage, you know. So does it make sense? That's the question. Next slide. Of course, harbors are not the only, you know, so to say, things that can mess up with beaches. You know, we have other problems, like power plants, because they have pipelines that go into the sea. Then you have, you know, commercial encroachments, a lot of real estate, people building very close to the beach, and therefore, you know, building over sand dunes. Then you have structures, of course. You have sand mining, you know, people taking sand from the beach and selling it. Yeah, go ahead.
No, because there's also, I don't know if it's really related, but there is the problem of promenade extension, right?
The promenade extension. Yes, I mean, in a way, it is related. It could be related in the sense that depending on what they do, I haven't seen the details. So there are two ways to look at it. One is that if they are going to use more stones and more concrete and more stuff to extend the promenade, then it's going to be, you know, adding more to the problem. But if they respect the shoreline alignment and they follow an alignment, what we hope is that it will give motivation, an added motivation for people to enjoy the shoreline, and therefore it gives a larger argument to bring beaches back for the public, you know. So I mean, there are two ways. So we still have to take a call on that. We are not very clear what's happening, what's being done. And then there's also a hidden, less obvious threat, you know, which is large dams. And large dams actually are a problem for the coast, because you remember right in the beginning of my presentation, I told you that sand comes from rivers. Okay, so when we build a dam across the path of a river, we are not only stopping the water from flowing, but we're also stopping the sand from reaching the shoreline. Okay, and rivers feed the shoreline. So a lot of the dams actually are starving the coastline from the needed sand. So you have now a few places, a few countries or states where they realize this. Like for example, in California, they've started dismantling all the dams along the river Colorado, you know, to let the sand flow back, because in fact they have been losing their beaches. So now, you know, these mistakes are being reversed. Next slide. We can have a look at some before-after scenarios to feel a little hurt, you know. So the beaches that were there, and then the beaches that we lost. It's kind of to dig the knife deeper in the wound. Next slide. Pondi, you know. Next slide. Next slide. This is Pondi town. Next slide. This is the cafe. Next slide. Kuruchikupam. This is where the promenade extension is coming up. You know. This is Kotakupam. Next slide. This is of course Auroville Repo. You know. Yeah, this is Repo. So this was the beach. This Baga's house. Baga's house was somewhere here. So you see on the beach, and this is Baga's house just before it fell, and just a few weeks later. Just when it this happened in a span of.
Before.
Sorry.
How many meters wide?
Oh, it must have been at least 150, 200 meters minimum.
It was so hot that we had to run
It's
and
minimum-
then put
minimum
our
200
towels
meters.
down and stand on the towels.
I mean, I think from Repo, I think you couldn't take a photo of the beach kind of the sea, sort of. You had to, you could see how wide it was. So anyway, so this is it all gone, and now you know this is 2013. Now there's no Repo anymore. I think the landward fence is like at the edge of the water. Like the whole thing is gone completely. So anyway, next. So just to summarize, you know, what has the port and all the mess after that caused? You know, it's the widespread destruction in Pondi and Tamil Nadu coastline. You know, and then it has had multiple effects. You know, a social impact. You know, preventing fishermen from accessing the sea. You know, large numbers of fishermen, about 70,000 of them we estimated. Next slide. So it's a large number of people affected. And then it's not only, you know, the erosion is about also, you know, vulnerability. You're exposed now to the cyclones and storms because, you know, you don't have that buffer, that sand buffer. And then another silent problem is, and less obvious problem is, the beach is also a buffer for your groundwater, for your fresh water, you know. The beach is like a sponge, and the dunes are like a sponge, and they absorb all the rainwater, and they keep the seawater away. Now, when we lose that buffer, we lose that fresh water with it, and the seawater then is allowed to penetrate the groundwater faster. So then there's also, you know, we are adding more chlorine in terms of water, so that has a big issue. And you know, I think we human beings like recreation, we like open spaces, you know, and we lose all of that too. You know, next slide. So we thought that this has to be fixed, and after many years of discussion, you know, talking and etc., we finally found an agency, someone who was willing to pay for a solution and experiment and try a demonstration project to bring the beaches back in Pondi. It was like a hurrah moment for us, and it's still ongoing with some hiccups, ups and downs, a few what do you call them now, waves of COVID. So then the project is actually nothing very complicated. The whole idea is, the first thing was to make people admit that there is a problem, you know, because till that time it was, yes, it's a sea level rise, yes, it's a natural phenomenon, yes, it's you know, it's not, we are not doing anything, the sea is coming in, you know. So there's a lot of, in fact, that's the tricky thing with coastal structures, you know. when you see a factory, spewing smoke, you can point your finger and you can say, that is the cause of my ill health. But in the case of coastal erosion, the local communities, although they know, but let's say except for apart from the fishermen, the common man doesn't see the relation between the harbor and the erosion. So that's a little problem of perception. So the solution is very simple. Try to get all the sand that is blocked on one side pumped in front of Pondi. Initially, a little more emphasis on getting the beaches back in Pondi, because if they get convinced that it can happen, then it helps everybody else. Now, we wanted only sand to be put back, but then after several discussions, consultations, the engineers told us, listen, there is a backlog of 30 years. For 30 years, nothing has been done. So you cannot fix this problem overnight. So we need to provide some form of stabilization to allow the sand to deposit, which will then make the decision makers happy. Those who see the beach reappearing, and then they will want to spend more money, and let's say make the project live longer. So we consented with a lot of reluctance to have some structures, but they are, so to say, structures that have minimum interference on the movement of the sand, and I'll explain that later. So they are actually reefs. They are reefs offshore. There's a southern offshore reef and another offshore reef, and the idea is to actually simulate the sandbar. You remember the sandbar in the first slide, that underwater dune under the sea? So the idea is to, let's say, replicate a sandbar, an artificial sandbar, to allow the waves to break further away and then allow the sand to deposit.
Made out of what?
So that was discussed, and finally it was decided that steel was the best option. Yeah, and I can tell you why steel also. One of the conditions we had was that it has to not be permanent. Okay, I mean, any structure in the sea should not be permanent, because the permanent solution is fixing the harbor. That is the problem. That's getting sand back. Anything else we do has to have, if it's needed temporarily, it has to have a shelf life, a temporary shelf life. And in the case of steel, it turned out to be the cheaper option, fastest to build, and also dismantleable and reusable if you need to. You can cut it open when the beaches are fixed. 15 years from now, we're all happy. We can actually go with welding machines, cut the steel and extract it, and then resell it, reuse it, whatever, if it's not fully rusted and corroded. So that was the choice of the material, and the idea, of course, is to take all the sand and move it there. Also, we go to the next slide. And this is now a close-up of that dredger I was mentioning earlier, that machine that sucks the sand. So you can see it has like teeth here in the front. It has teeth, and it's got like a vacuum cleaner, like a pump that sucks the sand. So this whole arm is put in the water like this here, and then it sucks the sand and the water. Then it pumps it through the pipe, goes through the tunnel, and then it goes all the way to the town. Next slide. And then it comes out at the town, and then it spews this slurry, this mixture of sand and water. And ideally, you cannot have too much sand, so you can have up to 30% sand, the rest water. Otherwise, the pipes will choke. So you need to calibrate the mixture, and then you are then starting to feed the beaches and nourish the beaches in front of the town with this sand. So next slide.
How does it attract the sand? Because of the arm that's moving.
No, so there's a pump. It actually sucks the teeth actually churn up the sand. The teeth actually are turning on the bottom of the bed, and it picks up the sand. And then there's a pump that sucks the whole. So you get this slurry of sand, and we were very lucky that when this dredging started, Kiran Bedi was there, the governor, and she was very dynamic. She was very proactive, and there was also some suspicion of corruption in the dredging, and there was some things happening. So there was this dredger, the Dutch are very famous for anything to do with the coast and building beaches and artificial beaches, and they've been creating new land ever since I think they've existed. So So this is a Dutch dredger that was actually belonging, just newly bought by the government of India, that was on its way to Vizag, Visakhapatnam, further north. And this is how it is done in other places, in other countries. So you have, this is a dredger, okay? What it does is, it picks up sand and it carries it with itself. Then it goes to the location where the sand is needed, and then it spews it out, it pumps it out, a little bit like a whale. So this is called rainbowing, So they create a rainbow of sand and they dump the sand. Of course, it was all a bit, last moment, not well planned, because the ship was passing by. Kiran Bedi calls Delhi. Delhi says, okay, just go there and do this. We'll work for them and go. And the ship it had too much depth. It couldn't come right close to the shore. So it put the sand as close as possible to the shore. So this is rainbowing. I think one of the few times, one of the first times, or I think the rare times it's actually being implemented in India.
Will the lack of sand from one place to the other cause?
So it will spread. It will spread. So now, when it deposits sand, there will be a lot of sand here, but then the ocean currents will spread it around.
No, I meant like you're pumping out sand from one place.
Yes.
Because the lack of sand over there.
So we are pumping out from the harbor, where there is the excess of sand, where there is too much sand that we don't want. So you identify a source where you have excess of sand, and then you put it where you have deficit. Yeah.
What about the
Question. Yeah. Once again, she had a question.
No, I just wanted to ask about the efficiency with respect to the amount of sand that it can take, as well as the cost efficiency. Is it similar to the pipe thing?
Good question. I didn't really think of it. Let's say, let me think about it. I'll get back to you. Yeah.
What about those sand being used for building and other things, do they also affect?
Let's say, yeah, of course. So let's say all the sand mining that happens in riverbeds actually, it's all sand that should have gone to the shore, or should go to the shore. And so all the construction we're doing, in fact, they're saying that the next resource that will run out is sand. We are talking about water today, and this is a water mela, but maybe in another 30 years' time we can have a sand mela. I think they're saying that the next resource that will actually, will run out of is sand. So sand is a big issue also. In fact, ironically, India is now importing sand from Malaysia for construction. They're using this horrible M sand, the granite sand is horrible for construction, but that's an example of the problems.
And we cannot choose the sand of the desert.
No, to find.
Salted.
So exactly. So again, now to make a beach, you want the same type of sand that you had there before. If it's too fine, it'll get carried away. If it's too coarse, the beach will be very steep. So ideally, you need a mix of fine and medium and coarse sand. So you need to mix it.
So when we're saying that we're running short of sand, or we're running out of
Sand,
where
yeah.
is it?
Where you mean? Well, the thing is, see, there are multiple.
So like if it's in the seabed, is it not accessible at all anymore? The same kind of sand that might be useful for construction.
You mean for construction all right? So I think there are multiple things that have happened. You remember the dams I told? The dams. So there's less sand being brought to the riverbeds. At the same time, there's no mining going on. If you ask me, in India, I think the problem is not that there's not enough sand. According to me, the problem is it's mismanaged. That's all. They'll all take the sand next to the bridge because that's the closest, cheapest way, and they'll make a 30-meter pit, and then they get to the groundwater. The groundwater gets polluted. Someone goes to court. Court says no mining. But if there was a scientific, proper management approach, and you take only the first 30 centimeters throughout the riverbed, I'm sure there is enough. But then it would cost more. Then the MLA will make less money. It's all those. It's at the end of the day, I think it's all money management.
Artificial substance that you can create to substance.
Use wood. But you can, if you're an architect, you can realize that. Yes, that's an issue. Actually, that's one of the problems with concrete. That's so this is how that dredger works. So it has a big pipeline with a vacuum, and then it carries all the sand on board, and then it goes and rainbows it to shore. Next slide. So we have here, so then this is where the sand is being fed, and then there are two reefs planned. This reef has not happened yet because there's no money for it. This reef has happened. We can go to the next slide. And of course, you remember again, in the early part of the presentation, I spoke of this natural alignment of the shoreline, which is, which has evolved over millions of years. So what has happened is, because of the erosion, our alignment has changed. The alignment of the shoreline has changed. So the reef is designed to realign the shoreline so that it reaches that natural stability that was there once upon a time. So these are all the factors that come into play when you're trying to restore a beach. Because if the angle is not suitable, then you'll have a lot of shoreline transportation. So if you realign it, so a lot of other elements to it. This was the reef. Next slide. This one. So there's the whole reef is designed to be underwater. Okay, it's not sticking out of the water at all because we don't want it to stop the movement of sand. So it's just like a speed breaker. Okay. Next slide. So you can see here, let's say this is a diagram. Maybe a little faint. So this is the water line. This is the reef, and there's a gap between the reef and the shore. Sorry, here this one. Yeah, there's a gap between the reef and the shore where all the sand can keep moving. And the sand can also go over the reef and spill over to the next beaches. So we are not transferring the problem to the other shorelines. So it will create some stability on either side of the reef, but then it allows the sand to go over. Just imagine like a speed breaker. It doesn't stop the differences between a barricade and a speed breaker along the road. A barricade makes you stop. A speed breaker just makes you go over it a little slowly. Next slide. We can skip this. So this is the reef that got built. So it's like a giant samosa, made of steel. It was found that it was simple to be built on shore, and then slowly slide. It's like a space, Star Trek or Star Wars, and it's like a spaceship, and then it's just kind of floated into the water. Next slide. You can see here it being. This is when they were launching it. 2017, yes. 2018, sorry. 2018. Yeah. So this reef was launched. Of course, it was full of air. Okay, so you're using very little material, full of air, floated out, and then once it was in position, the valves were opened and it was made to sink and lie on the bed, the seabed, which was of course leveled and prepared before that. So this is while it's being sunk. So you can see it's a very gradual sloping structure. So the sand can easily go over, and it's not really blocking the sand, so it's very soft. Let's say even though it's made of steel, it's considered a soft structure because it doesn't interfere much with the processes. This structure was built to position the structure, the reef, and then it was removed. So the whole now, and this is how it looks now. So now you just see during the low tide, you just see the tip of the reef, and at high tide it has about a meter's water over, so the sand can move. Where is it located? It's right opposite the French consulate, the Chief Secretariat French consulate, right bang opposite French Institute. So it's also designed as a surfing reef, but it's not really started working very well as a surfing reef. So the idea was to have a multi-purpose feature that it can help the erosion, but it can also then add some other value. Next slide. And then results so far. So when we started the beach nourishment, you can see already how the waves used to break against the rocks before, small waves on that day. But then after the nourishment, you can see that the waves are being pushed. But even though there is no beach, you can see that the sandbar is starting to form. So you can see the process of restoration happening. This is near the reef, the beaches that have grown. This is in front of the Chief Secretariat. Next slide. This is before after. Next slide. This was in 2018 when they had just done all that nourishment. So we had a nice beach after 30 years, returning to this part of the coast. We're trying to get that back. So you can just if you pause there. You can go to the previous slide, maybe. Yeah. The previous one. No, sorry. Next. If you don't mind going to the next one. Yeah, this one. Yeah. So you can see the reef is here. The reef is here. So you can see that it replicates the sandbar and it makes the waves break further away. And because of which, then we have a calm zone here where the sand can deposit and form beaches, but without blocking the movement of sand. So the sand goes around the reef and it can continue its journey towards the north, towards Auroville. So the idea was, to try to find a solution that satisfies everyone. So this is the beach that it helped form in 2018. Next slide. This is this year. They have started dredging again. There was an interruption because of COVID. They didn't do much dredging. Now this year they've started dredging, and now the beaches have started to reappear in Pondi. So this is now. Next slide. So this is in front of the town now, in front of the cafe somewhere there. Next slide. Let's say the idea was to try and reverse and to demonstrate and show that it is possible. It is possible. We can fix the problem. And I want to emphasize on the approach. The approach is to try and work with nature rather than trying to fight with nature. The coastal armoring, the sea walls, the groins is all like nature is the enemy. We are fighting against it. This is here. Okay, let's try to be friends with nature and try to see how can we work with nature and copy it, learn from it, to use its intelligence to help us. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm not sure I understood that before. How did the sand came back? Was it because of the stainless steel thing, or
No,
because of the pumping?
the pumping. So let's say the 90% of the let's say reason, the main reason why the beach comes back is because we have brought the sand back through pumping. The reef is only a little help. It's like a little band-aid. It only helps. Of course, unfortunately, in the public perception, this big steel reef, is the most impressive. So it catches all the headlines in the newspaper. It'll be talked about, and you show it on a slide, and you can show off, and it looks impressive. But actually, it plays only 10% of the role. The beach needs sand. So that is a sand nourishment that has been done.
How long is the steel reef?
It's about actually the triangle is about a 60 meter, but it's about 200 meters from shore. Well, the tip is 200 meters from shore. Sorry, yes. Yes, it will. Unfortunately, I mean, yeah. So we'll come to that. We'll come to that point. So the approach is to kind of work with nature, not against it. We go to the next slide. So we can see that beaches need sand. By putting sand back, we can get our beaches. By putting rocks, we'll not get the beaches back. Next slide. Of course, the long-term plan is to see a smart harbor. They talk about smart cities. So to see a smart harbor, do we need such a large harbor? Does it need such large breakwaters? Can we redesign the harbor so that it makes less of a mess? So this is something that it's a long-term thing. Probably take maybe another 20 years. Next slide. I think I've exceeded my time big time. I think. Yeah. And this is not, we're not doing anything reinventing the wheel. This is actually being done in Germany, Holland. This is in the West.
What is the name of that tunnel that is
they call it undersea tunnel because it goes under the sea. So this is places. I think this is Germany. There's a village along the shore that was a town that was. And this is Germany is a town, yeah, not a village. Village will have 10 houses. So they were losing their beach, then they nourished the beaches with sand, and then a few years later, the sand distributes itself, and you have a nice beach again. This is being done actually increasingly more and more all over the world, and there's no reason why it can't be done here. Next slide. In fact, in Miami, I cite this example because in Miami they did the same thing. In the 70s, Miami boomed. They had all these hotels right on the beach. The beaches, they started building these little harbors for people's yachts. The beaches eroded away because of the harbors, and the tourism industry collapsed. And then they realized that, hey, we need the beaches. So then they started restoring the beaches. So this is in the 70s. This is after, in the 80s and 90s, they started restoring the beaches. and the cost of restoration is just 1% of the money they make from beach tourism. So this is to underline the point that beaches make money also. They make economic sense. So of course we are not in Miami. I don't think we want to be. But even if we break even, even if we get back as much as we spend, we should be happy. So this is the case of Miami. So it's no reason why we should not be so as smart. And yeah, I think 2 slides just to conclude, and then yeah. So the beaches. What will the beaches bring back is all of this, all of these things that we use the beach space for. So beaches are not only a single dimensioned object. Like a seawall, there's only one work. It just protects us, from the shore, from the sea. Whereas a beach will provide us so much more, recreational space, tourism, fishing, festivals, and it provides us all these things, groundwater protection, etc., etc. So we think it's something worth asking for.
You cannot capitalize on all of that.
Sorry?
You cannot capitalize on
Yeah, you cannot cap. Yeah, exactly. This is all spread out. This is the benefits. The money is all spread out in all these things. Yes, exactly. One person doesn't make all the money. That's the thing. The money is spread out. The wealth is spread out. So that's why maybe they don't like it. But then people ask me, what people will ask, what can I do to make the beaches come back? And I think the simplest and the first thing that one can do to make the beaches come back is to just want the beaches, to be done. How they will come, that's the secondary, But if we don't even begin by wanting the beaches back, how will we ever even get to the point of thinking how to get them back? So yeah, my parting message would be, if in this room full we have a bunch of people who want beaches back, my work is done. That's it, I think. Welcome. And I think the questions have been exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does anyone
And the time has exhausted.